Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 849. It's February. I'm Tom Kegley, your host. The SPaMCAST 849 features our interview with Professor Barzan Mosafari. Mr. Mosafari is the co-founder and CEO of Keebo.ai. We talked about the industrialization of AI and using AI to deliver value now that it's more than just chatbots. If you've looked at your bills as you develop and run AIs in your business, you'll want to spend a few minutes listening to this conversation. Barzan Mosafari is the co-founder and CEO of Keebo.ai, associate professor at the University of Michigan, and a dual patent holder for his award-winning research at the intersection of ML, machine learning, and database systems across the University of Michigan, MIT, and UCLA. By the way, after this conversation, I'd actually like to go up to the University of Michigan and take a few classes from Professor Mosafari, a sought-after expert in the space who has spoken on panels like Inside Jam. He's passionate about sharing his research and expertise for advancing and optimizing data teams everywhere. Are you ready to get a handle on your cost of Snowflake? It's time for the interview. Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Super excited to be here.
We had a quick conversation before, and we're also super glad that we're inside because with wind chill, it is probably sub 10 degrees Fahrenheit as we speak. So, let's warm things up a little bit with, I've talked to a lot of people in the AI world and that are focused on, whether it's the infrastructure or the cloud side of, or just, the basic algorithms of AI. And every one of them has their own definition. I assume that we could get 100 AI people in a room and come up with several hundred definitions. Let's start with, how do you use and define that term?
That's a great question. I think probably there are as many definitions for AI as there are AI researchers out there. The way I like to sort of look at AI is it's allowing computers to learn and make decisions the way that humans do, as opposed to providing specific step-by-step instructions, right? So the way that humans learn something, like no one, sits down a 2-year-old, 3-year-old and walk them through English grammar. They hear their parents talk, they pick up how to speak English over time, from hearing others and reinforcing what works and what doesn't, right? It would be very difficult to write a traditional piece of software that could understand human sentences and respond with intelligent decisions or insights the way that, for example, LLMs do today. So obviously LLM is not the only form of AI, but that's a step towards like, hey, how can we allow computers to learn the way that humans do?
Do you distinguish between things like large language models and AI and machine learning?
That's a great question. So traditionally, AI within the computer science. So a bit about my own background. I'm also a professor of computer science at the University of Michigan. My area of specialty is at the intersection of really machine learning and database systems. So within academia, AI is usually the broader term. Like there were a lot of search heuristics that people would also refer to as artificial intelligence. And machine learning was more on the statistical learning side of things. But I think over time, machine learning has taken over so much that in academia, it's pretty much all machine learning nowadays. That's where the real stuff is. But in mainstream media, you rarely hear references to machine learning. And essentially, they use interchangeably, except that within the academic circles and more technical context, we use the word machine learning, whereas the public typically refers to it as artificial intelligence.
Why do you think there's that distinction? Why do you think the media is a little shy on using the term machine learning?
I think AI has more context to it historically. in mainstream media and Hollywood movies. The honest answer, I don't know. But like, if you pointed the gun to my head and asked me to take a guess, I would say that's just because, we talk about natural intelligence, right? So artificial intelligence is more approachable to the general public, to the general audience than machine learning. Why do we call it machine learning? When you need to explain how computers work, how binary instructions work, how traditional programming languages work, how traditional software works, and then contrast it with how we want the software to learn and get smarter over time with more examples, more training data. And that's why we call it machine learning. I think you could just save yourself the trouble of explaining that by just saying, well, it's, what intelligence means. This is just like that, except that it's artificial.
When do we drop the term artificial? When, with the tag of natural or artificial, that's a degree of categorization that at some point has to go away, and it's going to be indistinguishable, I assume.
I think it's happening to some degree. If you think about a lot of what you see out there, that like when you go on, like if you have a friend who's constantly watching movies, has watched every movie that's ever come out, has an opinion on everything, knows your personality really well, they might be able to say, hey, you know what, Tom, I think you're going to really like this movie. This is totally your type, right? And you say, well, this person knows me, we've been friends for so many years, he's watched so many movies. I'm going to take his recommendation. I'm going to go watch that movie this Friday night. But the same thing happens. You go on Netflix and you see a bunch of recommendations. And over time, you're like, hey, they've seen my browsing history. They've seen movies I've liked. They've seen movies I've watched. So you're going to take that recommendation seriously as well. I think that distinction is a little bit blurred already to some extent. You don't hear people saying, what is this intelligence based on? Is it coming from a human or is it coming from a computer? I think all they care about is this a sound recommendation? Is this a sound decision? Is this an appropriate answer? And they're less concerned about where it's coming from. And that's thanks to all the recent advances that we've all seen.
Organizations, whether they're, the huge tech firms or what the heck, the larger banks here in town or some of the other, medium-sized organizations are spending inordinate amounts of money building their own algorithms, building up their own infrastructure so that they can pursue all of this. That trajectory requires, I think, at some point, an understanding of what one has, some form of observability, but at some point also some mechanism to manage that. Why is that such a late add to the party, at least at this point?
That's a great question. I think two things have happened there. One is that people have realized that AI is not also the same way that humans are prone to error. Artificial intelligence or machine learning can also make the wrong predictions. Things can go sideways, regardless of who's operating with it, whether it's automated by AI or there's a human who set a bunch of rules. Things can go sideways. I think part of it is that realization. But I think the bigger part of this scheme is that now the consequences of things going sideways are bigger. We work with a lot of customers of cloud data warehousing. Like our own product at Keebo is something that automatically optimizes Snowflake warehouses and helps with reducing the cloud data warehousing bill. But back in the day, people used to have an on-prem SQL server that maybe they paid a full-time DBA to manage, and maybe every 2-3 years they would upgrade the hardware. Like I was just on a call with one of our customers. They're a company of 35 people. They're spending close to $5 million on their Snowflake bill. Like obviously we have customers with much bigger spend, but like just to give you an extreme example, it doesn't take a huge company to have a huge footprint. And that's when everything's going right. If everything's running the way they expect it to run, everything's optimal, they're spending $5 million. So it's not difficult for a piece of infrastructure to go unnoticed or, go continue with a suboptimal configuration over a weekend. And then you come back and realize actually you just burned through another $1 million of Snowflake credits, right? So the consequences are higher. the stakes are higher, the consequences are bigger. And I think that's why people have realized that actually this stuff we need to invest in observability for this sort of infrastructure as well.
Are tools like Keebo all about efficiency, or is this a value play?
It depends how you define value. For some customers, value is money. For some customers, value is time. And for some customers, value is peace of mind. And for some engineering organizations, value is really that productivity, that knowing that they haven't left any money on the table. So at the end of the day, at least in our case, we built this product with this vision in mind that we're not going to make those decisions for the customer. We're going to give them a shovel. They can use that shovel to dig gold. They can use that shovel to dig a well, to do anything and build a building with it. But what we're giving them is a tool. And then we're allowing them a very user-friendly way of saying, you know what? I want to save a lot of money on this workload over here because it's an offline workload. It's an overnight job. No one's waiting on the other end of it. As long as it finishes before 9 a.m. in the morning, be my guest. Go and save as much money as you can. Whereas this one, no, this workload is customer facing. This is where my CEO pulls the daily reports. The dashboard has to be up to date. There are some important stakeholders on the other end. I care about performance. Or here's a team that's overworked and overwhelmed and oversubscribed. They have a lot on their plate. Go figure out what are the low-hanging fruits they need to do. So the value, what's valuable to the customer, they make that decision. What's the right trade-off between cost and performance? That's their decision. What we're giving them is this really flexible and powerful infrastructure where with a few clicks, you can have AI at your fingertips and at your service.
Do you really think that the customers of Keebo really go through the process of defining what they think value is before they, in essence, buy into a product like Keebo?
That's a very good question, actually. So I think it depends how acute your pain is. Most of the time, like if you basically are burning through $2 million budget, within the first quarter of the year, I think what hurts, right? Like if someone goes to a doctor, someone who walks into a doctor's office, if they tell them, hey, what's bringing you here today, they're not going to be thinking about it. Like if someone's being just stabbed, like, you would think that they would know what's wrong, right? So most of the time when the customers walk through the door, they know that this bleeding money problem is a priority for them. And to be honest with you, in this economy, it doesn't matter what stage and size of company you are. Like if you can save some money, you're going to try it, especially if it doesn't come with any downsides, if it doesn't require any manual effort from your team, if there's no side effects, you're going to save money. But there are situations where I wouldn't say customers are not aware of the problem. I remember once I called the nurse line. I had a pain in my stomach, and I was asking them, and obviously the nurses have to go through their questionnaire, and I was waiting to be connected to the on-call doctor, and 20 minutes into the conversation, she asked me, "Have you been stabbed in that area recently?" And I was like, "Well, you would think I would have mentioned that earlier if I wasn't stabbed, right?" So it's not that the customers don't know that they're being stabbed by the cost of their Snowflake or other cloud data warehousing. It's that sometimes they just don't know that there's a solution. Right? Like there are people who've been stabbed and they don't know that they can walk into a clinic and have it stitched out. Right? So I think the thing that happens more often is not that customer didn't know that they need to save money or their Snowflake bill is out of whack, is that they didn't know actually there was an automated solution that they could trust and could save them a lot of money overnight without them lifting a finger. In fact, I remember early days of Keebo, one of our biggest objections from our customers, the biggest objections our sales team was having was a state of disbelief that, hey, this sounds too good to be true. So I think it's that people who are not especially haven't been following, machine learning or intelligence or the recent advances in reinforcement learning. When you pitch the idea that, hey, actually you just need to connect the accounts, you tell me what are the trade-offs on these warehouses, this thing is going to take care of saving you money 24/7. That sounds a little bit too rosy. But if you know that actually you can do even better things with AI, then it becomes more believable. And seeing is believing.
Do you see this sort of revelation as people learn that there are tools to manage and to make their use of, whether it's Snowflake or other AI tools, more efficient? Do you see that as sort of just the harbinger of industrialization of the AI world, or are we still really early days?
I think we're right in the middle of it. Like, it depends. Like, I think just like, most of your audience might have read that book, Crossing the Chasm. There's always early adopters, right? There's people who are getting out of bed every morning thinking about what's the next and coolest thing out there. I want to learn about it. I want to use it. I want to leverage it. And there's always people on the other end of the spectrum who are like, you know what? I'll be the last person to sign up for this. Let me make sure everyone else in this industry has adopted it. I think we're right in the middle. I think the industry, the key players out there, most of the decision makers, even the previous generation of leaders who did not really graduate with a degree and with some coursework in machine learning, have gotten enough exposure to understand that this is happening and this is beneficial. So I don't think it's as much of an awareness problem right now as it is, in my opinion, an adoption, a set of adoption barriers. So I think every provider out there that's building a solution that leverages AI should be very carefully examining how they're offering, how they go to market, how their messaging, how their approach addresses each and every one of those adoption barriers, which we can get into later in this conversation if you think your audience might be interested. But like, we've kind of identified 4 major adoption barriers, and depending on where your company is on that spectrum, one or multiple of those barriers are usually more pronounced.
Well, why don't you tell us about the adoption barriers?
So the first one, so there's 4 that we have sort of worked on. And actually, we built our product from ground up to account for those barriers and kind of eliminate them by design. So one of them is obviously the implementation barrier, right? The second one is the maintenance barrier. The third one, I think, is the security / privacy barrier. And the fourth one, I think, is the ROI barrier, right? So from an implementation barrier, a typical engineering organization, a typical company is going to have a, certain pool of IT / engineering resources they can tap into. And depending on what industry you're in, you could be very high tech, very modern kind of tech stack, where you have maybe engineering resources who are more well versed in machine learning or AI, or could be more like, generic back-end, front-end kind of resources. So it's the first question a decision maker has to face is, do I have the resources to implement a solution? Like, do I need to have an army of PhDs at my disposal to go understand this technology, implement it, or is it just a turnkey thing where I don't need to have 5 PhDs, to just go and implement this thing? Is it a 6-month implementation process, or is it something that I can turn on overnight, right? So that's the first barrier to adoption. The second one is maintenance. Okay, great. Let's say we invest this one-time cost adopting the solution that leverages this cool thing called AI. Well, what's the total cost of ownership? What's the ongoing maintenance? How much monitoring and oversight I need to account for to make sure this thing is performing, doing the right thing, continues to deliver the value that I was promised during the POC, right? And then the third one is the security and privacy considerations, depending on your industry. For example, if you're healthcare, if you're based in Europe, right? Like, is this violating HIPAA requirements? Is this, protecting my customers' privacy? Like, am I putting my precious enterprise data at risk or not? You need to think through those barriers as well. And the final adoption barrier, I would say, is the ROI barrier, because there's a lot of, I would say, imposters out there who basically, a lot of players who try to leverage the fact that AI is a buzzword these days, but they're not really leveraging AI, or they're not leveraging the way they should, right? So they're riding the wave, and then they're burning through a lot of goodwill. Let's say a C-level exec decided, hey, you know what? this sounds really good. I'm going to implement it. They go get the budget. They spend 3 to 6 months implementing it. And at the end of the day, they realize it was all word and no action. There was no actionable insight at the end of it. There was no actual ROI. So the sooner you can actually overcome those barriers, I think you can get faster adoption. Obviously, the more forward-looking the company, the customer, the quicker they're going to adopt, and vice versa. But you having thought through each and every single one of those 4 barriers is going to really help with your adoption. Like, just to give you an example, with Keebo, the reason why we got a lot of traction is not because it was not a coincidence. A lot of times people build a product and then they start thinking about how to sell it. Whereas for us, we did the other way around. We thought through these 4 adoption barriers and we decided to engineer the product in a way that every single one of those 4 things are taken on from day one. So for instance, we don't even see customer data. We train on their metadata. So that consideration is out the door, from the get-go. From an ROI perspective, we don't charge customers any money. We just charge them a percentage of whatever we save them. So it's like, from a pricing perspective, it's risk-free. If we don't save you money, you don't have to pay us a dime. For every $3, for example, we save you, we take $1, you take $2, right? Same thing with implementation, with maintenance. We made sure that it's all fully autonomous, doesn't require oversight. But these are just examples of how you can think through some of those barriers, which I think anything that leverages AI will face at some level.
I think that's an interesting way to approach building a business. I know this is a little less technical, but how did you decide to go down the path of deciding on how to conquer those barriers before you started building the product? That's not something that most technical entrepreneurs do, having talked to a few of them.
I think you're right. I think I'm just, I think so, like my previous startup, I think we faced a lot of those barriers. So, history is a great teacher if you're willing to learn. And then just personally, I'm someone who's extremely risk averse. I never go into anything without having plan B and C. So like most entrepreneurs are risk takers, whereas for me, it was a very calculated move. And like I thought through every single thing that could go wrong before starting our journey at Keebo.
Having talked to any number of entrepreneurs, most of them in the tech world, over the life of the podcast, I suspect that many of them would have wanted to learn what you learned, at least through the second or third or fourth or maybe 7th time that they did a startup. This is marvelous. Overall, if we go back, let's go back to Moore's curve, Moore's crossing the chasm, or a product adoption. Those 4 barriers, do you suspect that the sensitivity to those barriers change as, let's pick on AI. As AI becomes more mainstream and becomes more quote unquote industrialized?
It's hard to tell. If I were to guess, some of them would not. In fact, I think the sensitivity would increase, especially on the security/privacy side. I think the situation will get better, but not because sensitivities will go down. I think it's because more products are going to stand that litmus test. I think having built-in safeguards to protect privacy and security will become a table stake for a lot of offerings out there. So I think the expectations will probably grow, but I think more players will come in, and then they'll be like, hey, now it's standard that like any of these solutions, for example, if you're interested in a chatbot, if you're interested in a virtual sales agent, it becomes industry standard that the solution will be up and running within the first 48 hours, right? So I think it will become more commoditized. AI becomes more commoditized. The same way that, for example, I think most electronics, and I'm not a lawyer, but I think there's some law that requires a lot of manufacturers in the United States to have at least a 1-year warranty, right? That's not because people over time became less sensitive about whether this appliance is going to work for me or not, but just because this became so common that people decided, you know what, this is the bare minimum. If I'm buying something, it better be functional for at least the first year. So I think the same thing will happen with AI, that expectations will not go down, but I think more vendors will have to step up.
This has been marvelous. If you woke up tomorrow morning and somebody handed you your caffeinated beverage of choice and a magic wand and said that you had the power to change any two things that affect the effectiveness and efficiency of, running things like Snowflake or AI, what would those two things be and why?
The first thing I think would be, and I say this as someone who also comes from an engineering background, would be to sort of train engineers to think more about the total cost of building something versus buying it. I think part of the biggest challenges out there these days is, I think there's two challenges. So the first one is this tendency that engineers have by nature to build versus buy. And I have plenty of fun stories to tell you about, like some of the situations, really, really odd situations we've run into where customers who've had no business, who have no business building technology X, you find that there's a siloed team somewhere that's doing the company a complete disservice by building X that has no competitive value to the industry that their company's in. For example, there was I remember we once crossed paths with an interesting data team. The company was in the ads marketing business, and this team found out about Keebo. They're a huge consumer of Snowflake, and then we gave them a free POC. And in the end, we just asked them, "Hey, how did you feel about this? Like they saved. We were able to save them a ton of money if they continued, using the product." And their reaction was, "This is pretty cool. It's really impressive." But we thought about it and we said, like, why are we paying Keebo to do this? Why don't we just build this in-house? And I love that team. And first of all, like you guys are, an ads agency, pretty much. Like you should be building something that gives your business a competitive advantage. But forget about that. Let's just ignore which industry you're in, what's in the best interest of your company. I asked them, and granted, here's a team of 2 engineers. There's 2 people. Like we have a fully funded startup with, an army of machine learning and AI and database PhDs. And this is what we've been doing for years, even years before I started Keebo. So I said, like, how long do you think it's going to take you to build what we've built? They looked at each other and they said, this is not going to be our main focus, to be honest. We're probably going to work on it on the side. So we think it's going to take us 6 months to build this thing out. And I was just in a state of shock looking at them. And I was like, okay, so it's going to take you 6 months. This was wrong on so many levels. It's going to take you 6 months to build this thing out based on our projections over the course of those 6 months that they would be building this thing. If they had Keebo in place, they would have saved their company, let's say, I don't remember the exact figure, but let's say $500,000. Okay. So you're basically throwing away $500,000 over the next 6 months. And there you are thinking that you can build what we have built in 6 months with 2 people. And not even that, you're going to do so as a part-time job, maybe in the evenings or weekends while your day job is something else. And on top of that, you think that's actually a good use of your time for your employer. So I think you run into a lot of these situations.
So, I'll bite. I've seen goofy things like that too. And I agree that's a lot of hubris. How did they react when you had that conversation with them?
It's not actually. So, no, we had this conversation. They decided to just proceed and build it. I don't know. It's been a while. I don't know if they actually attempted to build it or whatnot, but you can probably imagine how that ended, right? The company lost a lot of money, and but the thing is, like, even though this might be an extreme example, this is more common than we think, because by nature, by training, we engineers are out there to build things. So if you basically don't have the business awareness, if you don't have decision makers or managers or leaders who can remind you that, hey, this is not in our business interest. You really want to build something? Why don't you build something that moves our business forward? Like, for example, I always tell our team internally that you guys, I tell our engineering org that you guys have no business of building the next and coolest logging library. That's not who we are. We're basically a data learning company. We optimize customer Snowflake and data warehouse. Whatever you do should be, driving value towards that direction. You want to use the coolest logging library, just go and buy it. Like, we should not be building stuff that we can buy. But I think that's just not natural. As an engineer, your first reaction is, I want to build this myself. Why bother buying it? Right? So, and you can always find a justification. I am pretty sure, no matter what it is, even your email client, you can go to your boss and say, you know what, why are we using Gmail? Why are we using Google Suite? There's this specific situation where the admin sends this email, and I think it would be really important if we have this custom-made feature. So let's buy it out, in-house. If there's no one who can talk sense into you, I think that's going to happen. But yeah, I don't know how that conversation ended, but it ended, and I think they're not alone. I think there's a lot of orgs out there that are building things, or they think they're building things that I think they would have been better off just buying it off the shelf for a tiny fraction of the cost.
Okay, that's fair. That's actually number one. To what's number two? And I'll try not to go crazy.
I think the second one is basically like what I see is there's a lot of engineers out there who are feeling threatened by the prospect of AI coming and taking their jobs. And if there was the second thing I could change, I would probably help that generation of software engineers to sort of, number one, understand that this is going to happen no matter what they do. It's just a matter of when, rather than if. So if they're really doing something that can be automated and replaced by AI, it will happen. It's just a matter of time, because you don't want to be on the wrong side of history. This is happening. And the second thing is that acknowledgement comes with a responsibility to go and equip with yourself with training, right? Like, go back and take an online class on machine learning, learn how to best leverage it. I think the next engineer, like how being able to write code, understanding basic data structure is a requirement for every software engineer. I think very soon, having a basic understanding of statistics or machine learning will also become table stakes. So this is going to happen. Like, instead of resisting it, instead of telling your boss why you should be doing everything manually and build everything in-house and worrying that, hey, they're going to take my job away, go pick up a book on machine learning, a textbook on machine learning. We're living in a day and age where you can just go take a bunch of classes online and brush up on your stats classes. If you've never, if machine learning was not part of your curriculum when you were in school, go back and watch a video series. Like, knowing how to best leverage machine learning will make you indispensable, because that's the next way, the next wave of software engineers who are going to be leveraging AI the right way for the right problem.
At some point, that will become table stakes. And having the white hair, I've seen this occur more than once in this industry, where it's changed enough that if you didn't take it upon yourself to continue to learn, then you got to do something else, like greeter at Walmart or something. That's a tad bit of hyperbole. This has been absolutely marvelous. I'd like to say thank you very much for spending time this afternoon with the Software Process and Measurement Cast. Before we go, how would people continue the conversation? How would they find out about you? How would they find out about Keebo? Platform's yours.
No, thanks so much. Yeah, I'm an academic and an entrepreneur at the same time. Like, anyone who's interested in getting in touch, running an idea by me, like I do this as a fun thing, as a way of giving back to the community. I'm still educated by training. I a lot of times even with our customers, put my professor hat back on and try to be helpful whichever way I can. You can find me. You can Google my name, Barzan Mosafari. I have my academic homepage with my publications there. You can reach out, send me an email, or go to Keebo.ai. So that's Keebo.ai. Request a live demo, or find me on LinkedIn, and would love to, if you're using Snowflake in any capacity, or you're thinking about leveraging AI, LLMs, or Gen AI in any capacity, happy to have a conversation.
We will have all of that contact information in the show notes. Barzan, this has been absolutely marvelous. I have enjoyed this. And as I said, anytime I get to laugh and, have a good conversation, it has been a good half hour to an hour conversation. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Tom, for having me. It was a great pleasure.
The Software Process and Measurement Cast is sponsored by Mastering Work Intake by Thomas M. Cagley Jr. and Jeremy Willits. Look at your to-do list and tell me that your work intake process is perfectly balanced. If it's not, it's time. See about buying a copy of Mastering Work Intake. Your work-life balance will improve. Links in the show notes to the book on Amazon or at J. Ross Publishing. Do you want to test the water before actually going out and spending your hard-earned paycheck on the book? Jeremy Willits and I offer free, the word free is truly free, office hour sessions. In these sessions, we'll facilitate helping you to identify and create a plan to tackle one of your work intake challenges. Book the time, link in the show notes. In Reread Saturday News, Chapter 2 of Development as Freedom by Amartya Sen, the author takes a deep dive into the goals and mechanisms of development. This chapter begins by contrasting two common opposing views of the development process: I win, you lose approach and the win-win approach. The comparison is useful because it allows us to consider the clash between highly libertarian and more collective points of view on development and behavior. Links in the show notes to this week's installment of Reread Saturday and all previous weeks of our reread of Development is Freedom. Buy a copy of the book, read along. In the next Software Process and Measurement Cast, number 850, we'll feature an essay on the difference between change apathy and indifference. This is not an academic dissection because it impacts on how we approach change. We'll also have a visit from Susan Parente, who brings her Not a Scrumdimentalist column to the podcast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?